Good day. Uh, Disclaimer: this rambling video is made for the UNAD, a university. So this has no monetary purposes. It's just academic purposes. What I'm going to talk here, it's made with the only purpose of practice English in the class with the classmates. Uh, so my topic, the topic that I choose, because it is related with hobbies or with services or items we like. So I choose the video game industry, the current video game industry. But to talk about the current video game industry, you have to talk to a somewhat historic recount. Currently, there are three major video game companies who are all big corporations, especially two. Two are Japanese and one is North American. The North American one, who is the newest, is Microsoft, who entered the industry back in 2000 with the first Xbox. Meanwhile, the two Japanese are first, the oldest is Nintendo, who actually is a very ancient corporation, who was actually installed in the late Meiji period, like in the 1800s, in the late 1800s. Back then, obviously, they didn't make video games. They did a Hanafuba. It's like a cards game, but this cards game was used by Yakuza, and it was a gambling game. And then in the 1970s to 80s, they started to do electronics, entertaining electronics, until in 1982 they to 84 they developed the first game home console of their developing um, of their own making, called the Nintendo Entertainment System. Then, uh, because of certain attitudes of Nintendo, who basically had the monopoly, they partner with another Japanese company called Sony to develop an attachment for the Super Nintendo to play CD-ROMs. They call it the PlayStation. But Nintendo betrayed Sony in a scummy move, and decided at the last moment to do this with Philips, who is, I think, a Finnish or a European company. So Sony, being mad, wanted revenge, and they developed their own video game console that was called the PlayStation. So we start to see a certain pattern. This pattern is called arrogance or hubris. Each one of these companies in different stages have been the top dog, the number one company, and this creates a certain sensation in their executives that they can do whatever, and just by brand recognition they will sell and they will dominate. and start doing anti-consumer and anti-developer practices. This creates uh, actually the opposite situation because people start seeing this and start going to to the competition in search of better customer practices. Something that people don't buy things just by brand recognition. Brand recognition is important, but people also want to save money and also want to have the best with the less money. And always these companies get arrogant, or they start asking the consumers to pay more, to pay more money for their products. Uh, so if we go in time, the PlayStation uh, enters the market in 1994 and brings a lot of things that the other the back then only Nintendo was the and Sega, but Sega is out of the competition now. Uh, bring things that the Nintendo didn't have. So the first thing that um, PlayStation had that its competitor didn't have was, for example, a CD player. Unlike the Nintendo consoles who had still cartridges with less memory and were far more expensive to produce than the CD-ROMs. In contrast, uh, the the CD-ROM is cheaper, far more easy to produce and manufacture. Console was more powerful until Nintendo launched its Nintendo 64 that still was a cartridge based. This degenerated a trend. The first trend was that in this generation of consoles, Sony was the number one and top dog. It sell the most consoles. It earned most money. So they launched in 2000 the PlayStation 2 in competition to the Nintendo GameCube and the Sega Dreamcast. The Sega Dreamcast failed and was the last console of Sega. In this generation enters Xbox, but once again, Sony won this race. Won this. It was top dog again. So this continues till 2006 when they launched the PlayStation 3. Sony was believing they were unbeatable. So they launched the PlayStation 3 being the more expensive and the hard and the most complicated to program games and programs in this console. This generated that the competition, Nintendo launched a really cheap console called the Wii. It was extremely cheap and extremely easy to program. People compared prices. The the PlayStation 3 was $600 on launch, while the the Switch, no, the Nintendo Wii, I beg my pardon, the Nintendo Wii was only around 200, less than $200. So people decided to buy far more Nintendos than PlayStations. Also, game developers, the people who make the games, found that programming games on the Nintendo was far more cheaper and far more easier. So a lot of third party decided to produce games in the Nintendo console and not in the PlayStation. Then Microsoft entered the race with its Xbox console, who was far more powerful, actually cheaper than the PlayStation. I don't know. It was not far more powerful. Was cheaper and also easy to manufacture. But its power level was comparable to the PlayStation 3. So this caused that the PlayStation 3 didn't sell what it was expected, and Sony waste money. Unlike Nintendo and Microsoft, who started to gain a lot of money and brand recognition again. So PlayStation have to correct me and place measures to not be a total failure. So things continued in this direction, but at the end of that generation, the total winner of that console generation was Nintendo with the Wii, followed by PlayStation 3, who managed to recover and sell just a few more consoles than the Xbox 360. Then we came to the past gen, so the last generation of consoles were the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and the Nintendo Switch, the Nintendo Wii. Nintendo committed a total mistake in branding, so they were out of the competition in that generation and was a total failure. Xbox this time was the one who got arrogant and hubris, and it started to act in a way who was anti-consumer, extremely expensive console. For example, the Xbox One was $400 or $450, while the PlayStation 4 was $399. No, 299. So a full $100 difference. And also, the Xbox and Microsoft excite or Blitz, it was obligatory to be all the time connected to the internet. So a lot of people, even in United States, in rural areas, don't have full time access to the internet. This caused a lot of anger, so people flocked to the PlayStation 4, causing the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation brand and Sony a bit top dog once again, beating both Nintendo and Microsoft. Then we come to the current generation, who are the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series, and the new Nintendo Switch. Once again, Sony, full of hubris and arrogance, started to do the same mistakes they committed with the PlayStation 3, as opposed to Nintendo and Microsoft, who this time got the things right. Whereas PlayStation and Sony, with a new executive, started to say things that offended the player base, like saying all the games, people don't play all games. So, cutting off the possibility of retrocompatibility. This means that you can play PlayStation 1, 2, and 3 games on your PS5. So this was scrapped, while Microsoft said the opposite. You can play all your library of older consoles in our console. This give a lot of boost to Microsoft. Also, Pricing. The PlayStation 5 is expensive, but it's not that as expensive as it was the PlayStation 3. But Microsoft decided to do three consoles that follow the Series brand. A really cheap console for the masses called the Series S. A really expensive console who has the same price of the PlayStation, named Series X. Yes, the names are confusing of the Xbox, and people complain about it, but it's just a branding issue. The rest of the policies were good. And uh, uh, branch who is to support the older generation. This gives people the opportunity to play new generation games in all the in all the habitat, in all the consoles Microsoft produces, being pro-consumer. Also, Microsoft created a program called Game Pass, in which by paying a monthly fee of $10, you can access a huge library of games free. While PlayStation, you need to pay games, $70, and that's the other bad thing. All the other companies still ask the consumers for $60 per new game when it's in the expensive game. While Sony is asking $70. This this causes some issues in the community, as opposed to Nintendo and Microsoft, who still ask for $60. Also, the new Nintendo game console is cheaper, far easier to produce. Its power is far less powerful, but it's portable, it's mobile. You can play in games in your bedroom, in the bathroom. So this created some kind of gold rush of Nintendo consoles. Right now, if Sony don't change these policies, they could lose this generation. For now, I think they are on top, but Microsoft is following very closely. Even though Sony still has a lot of advantages. The first advantage Sony has, be, more beyond brand recognition, is its games. It has the more powerful and recognized um, game titles, game IPs, trademarks. Meanwhile, or as opposed to Microsoft, that is not producing first party titles very much. It does, but it produces far less. For example, Sony produces 4 to 5 exclusive games that only exist in their platform, as opposed to Microsoft, who only produces 1 or 2. So there are still some advantages to the PlayStation, and I'm a PlayStation fan, but I can just pretend to say, Sony is superb and is the better platform. No, this current generation, if you don't have much money, you will prefer to buy an Xbox because you will access far more games and a platform that will support you and that you can access because you will have the money to access these are their their titles. Whereas, or opposed to, or different from Sony, who is the more expensive brand right now, and is having also a lot of issues in the chain of production. So Microsoft is producing a lot of consoles that people can access, and Sony, because they are produced, their consoles are basically manufactured in Asia. With the COVID pandemic, this created a lot of workers can work in the manufacturers. So uh, Sony is producing less consoles than Microsoft. This, in the laws of offer and demand, causes its console in the individual markets to go up. Even if Sony still asks $400 for the PS5, there are less consoles, and people want a PS5. This causes the price to go up, and this causes problems because this generates a cycle, a vicious cycle, in which people want a PlayStation 5. It's already expensive, but it gets more expensive because it's harder to get one. So if Sony if Sony really wants to keep being the number one company, it has to change its policies, even though they're still the number one. But for how much time? Thank you for listening me, and we'll see you again soon.